Hi, and welcome to the Founders Journey podcast. I'm Greg Moran with my co-host Peter Dean. Peter, good to be
Thanks
back.
for having me again.
You're welcome.
I'm the guest that never left.
Yeah, I know. You're just the guest that keeps coming back over and over on the show. And just as a reminder, Founders Journey podcast is really about bringing coachable tips and coachable and actionable tips to founders by founders, and got a great founder with us today that we're super happy to have with us. Dave Kline, welcome to the Founders Journey podcast.
Pumped to be here, guys. This is gonna be great.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. So just as a quick background, and then I'll kind of let you tell the story. So Dave and I. Dave is a really prolific writer on Twitter. He's my sort of go-to management and leadership guy on Twitter, and is so if you don't follow Dave there, you should. And Dave was a senior executive over at Bridgewater, which is one of probably the best known hedge funds in the world today. And he's got a few coaching, management related things going here. So we're going to dive into that and talk about Dave's transition from the hedge fund world into entrepreneurship. So looking forward to getting into it. So Dave, just, kind of let's start at sort of the most basics, right? You've had a really distinguished career before starting this founder's journey. How did you start it? What led you to kind of saying, hey, hedge funds aren't enough for me. I really want to do this other thing on my own and grind away for a while.
It's a great question. You use the word distinguished, and I would have probably said fortunate. Even just tracing back, it's one of those moments where you're kind of like, how did I get here? Right. And if I go back, even to something as both important, but also sort of unimportant as like picking my undergrad, like I was down to Bucknell and Johns Hopkins and ultimately picked because someone sadly got shot on Johns Hopkins campus while I was visiting. And there was no
real story? Like literally got
shot.
And
no part of
like, seems like an awkward thing to laugh at, but it's just
right. But no part of, one stoplight town, Dave Kline was going to go do that. So I ended up at Bucknell. From Bucknell, I ended up at a big four consulting firm because an alumni came back and passed out on my couch and then popped me into an open interview slot the next day, and then I ended up working at an Ivy League institution for a year, but then I left there because they didn't want me to go on vacation with my now wife. So I got a different job instead at Moody's, where I landed for 10 years. Then the train broke down for 3 days. And I finally took a call from a recruiter that happened to be from Bridgewater and landed there for 10 years. So like on paper, it seems distinguished. Like they're pretty great institutions. I landed at each time, but at each hop along the way, something seemingly small at the moment happened and intervened. And then kind of to your original question of how did I then go from, Bridgewater to, the business I own and the business we're building, it was an amazing 10 years. And part of the way Bridgewater treats management, and it's a lot of what I end up teaching, is like this craft. It's a thing that you can go and apply kind of first principles to different areas, solve problems. So we did a lot of rotating, right? So I was COO of our research department. I was COO of our core management department. I then led that core management department. I did part in talent and recruiting and executive development. And in that rotation, you sort of run out of stops eventually. And so the question for me was like, did I want to go be the COO of another department, or was it time to finally, actually do the founder's journey? And sort of voted for the latter, about 6 months into the pandemic, which was probably a questionable call, but we started kicking the tire, right? But we gave ourselves a year. We had saved up enough to say like, we can make it a year. Let's see if we can find a business to buy. Like that was probably the biggest insight for me. And funny, it draws back to Twitter, but I'd always thought I'd have the big idea and I'd go start the unicorn. And I would realize I'm not a huge risk seeker. I'm not like a massive, shoot the moon and sleep on the couch guy. And the notion of like, sweaty startup, Nick Huber, talking about buying business, or Cody Sanchez, all these people who are buying these, businesses that people would mostly go by, and you started like, your eyes would catch the numbers and you're like, on a risk adjusted basis, this is kind of interesting.
Right.
And so it started we kicked the tires on brick and mortar, stuff as well as digital stuff. And instead of it taking a year, it took us 5 months. We missed on a few businesses, but we ended up buying a education review site from the original creator in Australia. And that journey kind of turned on in May of last year. So we've been at that just about a year this week.
So what were the, you went out, you bought this thing. What were the biggest lessons you learned in buying that first, web property, right? It's kind of a big jumping off point for somebody to make.
I would say, well, let's put lessons on both sides of the ledger, like pre-buy and post-buy.
Yeah.
So, the lesson before we bought it, and it's funny because this has happened to us multiple times in our life, either with houses or businesses, et cetera. But one of the first businesses we saw, one of the first websites we saw, it's like you knew you should buy it, but you just couldn't talk yourself in. You couldn't talk yourself into the first one. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm not going to marry my first date.
Right.
You're like, I'm supposed to do due diligence and look at a bunch of stuff.
That's right. 100%. 100%. So
everyone told me that same thing, right?
and it had been lingering, and so we were like, oh, we'll kind of lowball, we'll get a great deal. And within 48 hours, someone like paid asking and like disappeared. And we were like, you know what? That was a good business, even at asking price. Totally had like the monopoly on the market. And so that one sailed. And I think that's part of it is, you do need to probably go through that. You probably need to miss a few to be ready for the one that when it shows up. Yeah. Because then I remember when SkillScouter showed up, and it's an intersection of like a good business. It was cash flowing. It wasn't a crazy multiple. And it was something like that we both cared about, which was, online education and all of the access that gives people around the world. And it was growing. Like we're both big believers that this was only going to keep going, even though and we didn't think that bump in the pandemic was going to be temporary. We thought that was going to be, permanent.
Right.
And I remember I saw it, I read 2 minutes about it and I texted my wife and I'm like, oh, I found the business we're going to buy. Hadn't talked to anyone, hadn't kicked the tires, but sort of just knew. And then it worked out and we put together a great deal. So I don't know. I think it's like, give yourself some grace. Like you have to see some and you shouldn't be, we beat ourselves up for about a week on that one. Like we sort of knew we missed, but.
Well, it's hard not to,
100%.
It's part of the process.
So how did that, so take us from that point, you buy SkillScouter. This is your first real foray into, now you're on your own, right? Now you're officially sort of out there doing it, whether you like it or not.
Business came with no staff, so I was definitely on my own.
Right. So now you're stuck with this thing. Where did it start to lead you? Because I know that path has really been, has been an interesting one for you. I think it, led you kind of down this road to Twitter and sort of in a lot of different directions. How did that really evolve for you?
Well, I think before we get into the upswing, let's go through the downswing.
Let's talk about that. We talked about that.
So again, our first digital property. Now I ran Moody's.com, which was a $400 million website. So it's not that I'd never seen a website before, but a B2B website with a global brand supported by, dozens of developers is very different than my WordPress site that I'm doing out of my home. But so everyone told me, don't touch it. Like it's a billboard. It's, you know what I mean? Just like, don't screw it up. And so that's what I did. I was like, wow, 5 different people who do this for a living tell me not to screw it up. I'll just like leave it be. And like watched it slowly tick down a little slower. And then about 6 weeks in, it like fell off a cliff. And I sort of remember seeing like going down to my wife and being like, that part where we're not supposed to touch it, I'm going to go touch it.
So what was falling? The web traffic, the leads, like what was
the web traffic was down, the conversions were down. And when I actually got into it, I uncovered 2 things. Neither of which were me really being sold a bill of goods. One was it had been consistently doing this, but Google changed its mind about how much they were going to punish slow mobile performance. And we had a slow mobile site. So that was getting us killed when they changed that. And then the second was, and this is just one of those, wouldn't even known what question to ask in due diligence to watch for this. But apparently this concept of backlinks is how websites get credibility.
Absolutely.
And so if you go back 5 or 10 years, what people used to do is game the system and go get these backlink farms. So Google catches on to that. And now they punish sites for doing that. Yes. So what do clever, creative, competitive entrepreneurs do? They hire the link farms to go to their competitors.
To sub you, subrunning you. Yes.
So all of a sudden my backlinks were doing this and my traffic
Yeah.
was doing that. And I was like,
You got to
what?
watch it and disavow all that stuff. But
Exactly. So I learned that lesson. We disavowed all them, cleaned that up. And then, you know, we also did some additional optimization and brought traffic back.
Cool.
But I would say the other good news, if there was a silver lining in those first couple months, the same idea that exists when people talk about buying like, you know, old businesses that are still on like yellow pads, you know, like, you know, like it's a physical mailing list. Even digital, like this site was built 2 years ago. One of the first things I did was reach out to our affiliate partners and just say like, hey, I'm Dave Kline, now on the site, just want to introduce myself. And in like 9 out of 10 cases, they were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know there was a human on the other side of this relationship.
Right.
And I was like, really? And so it was just interesting that just being human and being a business person, and most of them, just by knowing there was a human, they were like, we can give you better terms.
Right.
So I wasn't even like a hard negotiation. It was just, you know, making that personal connection. And so that would be my other lesson is like sort of look for that in the purchases where you're just like, oh, they haven't even built a real relationship, asked for 10% more, asked for $2 more. And most of the people, if you have actually a good asset, will gladly give it because you're still way cheaper than all the other methods for acquiring new customers.
Yeah. It's really, you know, it's funny. I mean, I've seen this in a lot of M&A transactions that I've done, you know, over the years too, where, you know, a lot of times you're buying a business that, you know, it's being sold for a reason, right? You've got a founder that's checked out, you've got, you know, things like that. And yeah, it's just amazing when you just kind of breathe some life into it, right? With a real human being who's actually excited about this business and wants to do something. It's, you know, and you actually just express that, right? By contacting somebody and said, hey, I'm Dave. I'm actually a human.
Right.
Sometimes the bar is set pretty low.
Yeah.
So I lucked out as, you know, as traffic was dropping, you know, fees were moving up. And so they was mostly offsetting. So I sort of was able to tread water on the 2 months of the learning curve. And then when it bounced back, be more profitable. So that was super helpful.
Yeah.
But then Greg, you alluded to, so now I'm spooked, right? Now that Google can change its mind about mobile performance and my site is 99% Google traffic, I'm spooked. And so I say to myself, okay, the playbook is social. Everyone's like, you could have paid ads, but social, like build the presence, is more sustainable, et cetera. It came with accounts. The accounts had like 50, you know, nothing particularly big. Maybe Instagram was the biggest, but I have never been on Instagram and I would have no idea how to use that. The one that I had been on was Twitter. And so this is where like 2 adjacent ideas kind of come together. One adjacent idea was when we bought the site, we were seeing this rise of cohort-based courses. You know, so whether that's Maven, On Deck, Reforge, Disco, there's lots of different providers, but this idea of marrying online learning with live cohorts of peers. And so we thought, hey, and you see this also in the like the Gumroad space. A lot of the creators will create these types of things too. And so could we start to write reviews on these? They tend to be higher ticket. They tend to be higher engagement. So people complete them. You know, will that be an extension for the website? So that was a hypothesis meeting up at the same time of we should go on social. So like, oh, great. Why don't I go take 1 or 2 of these? And so we took Saul Hill Bloom's audience building course. And hopped in there. I'm going to build SkillScouter's, you know, website. And we're like 3 minutes into the course and they're like, don't build brand accounts. They're impossible. Build your own. I was like, oh, okay, great. What the heck am I going to talk about?
Right.
So, you know, and so it started with, I've been passionate about management and coaching and leadership and, you know, thought my 10 years of Bridgewater, there's a particular interest in sort of how we did things, Ray's written books about it. And so started just talk about it's almost like that architecture was sort of my point of view layered on top, you know, combined with then also the lessons from Moody's, from Columbia, from PwC, et cetera, and started talking. And I didn't have many aspirations. I was hoping to go from like 0 to 10,000 over a year. It sort of turned into, we're 6 months in and I'm at 40,000. So it's pretty crazy. And there's so many upside surprises, right? Like I wouldn't have met you, Greg, if I hadn't been on there. And there's probably 24 people who that I can say the exact same thing about. So it's been that's been a big surprise.
how much of that is now playing into the way that you're thinking about your business moving forward?
A lot. No, I would say a couple of things. One, in terms of like confirming that hypothesis on the website, I think it's a good idea, but it might not belong on that website.
Right.
You know what I mean? The idea that I might be trying to capture by trying to capture the entire like online learning market, I sort of cater to none.
Right.
Yeah.
Versus right now, I think the site we bought looks a lot at kind of entry-level jobs, helping people get those, the related courses. And the cohort-based course ones tend to be more expensive, more either like tilting very like corporate and professional, or tilting very creator economy. And so I think the idea is like confirmed, but it might need to be a different website. So that's one piece of it.
Yeah.
You know, the other one is those relationships also then led me closer to Maven, and then building my own cohort course. So another part of that investment originally, when I sort of had an idea about it, was, well, instead of driving and getting $10 for a subscription or something else, why don't we own our own content and drive people to that and capture the 90, 100, 200, in some cases, thousands of dollars that people pay for courses. And, you know, started to get to know Wes and Goggin at Maven, kind of got into the accelerator. I think I was in the cohort 4. That was last December. I did one tweet that kind of went accidentally viral about delegating. That got a couple million views, and all of a sudden I had a wait list that was bigger than the class I could possibly teach. And we did our first cohort in end of February, early March, and then we're about to kick another one off next week. And so that's becoming a cornerstone of the business, probably right now overshadowing the billboard side. And then there's ideas of, you know, I was chatting with Peter earlier, like there's ideas up market and down market. So if you ask me like what my new founder journey challenge or overwhelm is, it's like, how do I pick? You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, you know, and that's always the hardest part of this, right? Because you sort of, I was just actually talking to somebody else about this just like an hour ago. And, you know, there's this sort of, you know, blessing of too many choices, right? Where I think
everyone's like, congratulations. And you're like, I have no idea what I'm going to do.
Right. Exactly. It's this like newfound sort of sense of freedom, right? You come out of a corporate environment, and it's, you know, and suddenly you wake up on that first day. And this was like my world, you know, back in October when I wound down as the, you know, CEO of a company that I've been running for 13 years. It's like, you wake up the next morning, it's like, wow, I can literally do anything. I can do anything I want. I can also do anything I want. Right. And, you know, it's one's good and one's really not that good. And, you know, it's sort of trying to dissect, you know, trying to kind of maneuver your way, because so much of like the founder's journey is just kind of trying to maneuver your way into this area. I know you yesterday you and I were joking about this on Twitter yesterday. You had this like my new favorite term ever, which is the Serendipity acceleration engine, right? And but that's it. It's like, how do you just kind of put yourself in the position? How do you find your way into the position where opportunity finds you, right? And then to try to narrow it down.
100%. And that's, you know, I wrote about this morning, I think also, which I'm like, my great regret is that I started writing 6 months ago. Like if I had gone back, it's not that I haven't been on Twitter for a decade. I've been there, just never, you know, I was a bookmark hoarder. Everyone else's great ideas, I'm going to come back to them later. And I didn't fully appreciate what it would mean to like put my ideas into the world, what that might attract, you know, what that might teach me, because, you know, when I say something stupid, people call me on it, and that's fine. You know, and sometimes I say something pretty reasonable. I got a DM yesterday from someone who like read my compensation thread and was like, I went for broke and got like 5% more than even you suggested. I can't believe it worked, you know? And I'm like, that's pretty cool. Like just somebody in the world got what they deserve because of something I wrote, and it gave them the courage to go ask for it. You know, so I think part of that serendipity engine is just put them out there. Like each one of these ideas is like a new billboard, like who's going to drive by? You know?
No, it's sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, now it's like the metabolizing. It's like, okay, so then you swing from that to like, now the serendipity is coming, and there's these new interesting, like I'd say the dilemma I'm going through right now, which maybe you guys have both gone through, I'd love to get your perspective, is opportunities that are about me, but will be, they'll be, whether that's coaching CEOs or teaching more cohorts at companies, et cetera, versus building things that make money without me, right? Either through leverage of a team, which introduces a whole new set of pressures and payrolls and people's well-being, or through like digital assets. But, and so how do I want to weigh those? And like, is there a clever way to put a flywheel together that connects them? But that's the tension right now. Like I'm loving being a solopreneur, but I'm about to run up against what I can do.
So I have one question that goes back. So when you left, did you ever think this was what it's going to be like? Like you were going to get this much opportunity based on, is this where you thought you were going? Or is this kind of like, whoa, this is way more than I thought?
Way more than I thought. I had, it's like I had flavors. Like I sort of knew I have an asset or a portfolio of assets. We opted to go a little bit bigger on the business because my thought was not to have like 1,000 little plates to spin, but to have like one good one. Right. And then I thought I would teach, but I thought, I would pick up, we're in Connecticut. There happens to be 10 great schools within 60 minutes. And so I thought like, go try out teaching as an adjunct, swing over to Yale, go back to NYU, Columbia's down this, Fairfield, there's tons of schools right here. And so I knew those pieces would be in play, but then the literal way they sort of showed up and meshed together, I don't think I'd be lying to say I saw it coming.
Yeah. That's cool. Cause you kind of let your journey take you to where you need to go, but you enabled it too, the whole way,
I think that to me, you just said this, David. Peter probably is getting sick of me saying this on podcast, but
no,
that to me today, it's so interesting to me, right? With the power of this audience, right? With the power of a distribution tool like Twitter really does, and I'm in a very similar state, right? So I wound down, as the CEO a while ago, and around January, I've never literally in my entire life, never set a New Year's resolution, but it just happened to be on January 1st where I said, I'm going to start writing every day on Twitter. I'm just going to do it. Right. And I did, and I have. And what that brings is just this, number one, it's just this power of kind of cataloging your thinking, right? And catalyzing your thinking. But what it also, I think, brings is this, you start to just think in, because we were talking about this actually this morning with a good mutual friend of ours, Barrett O'Neill, and we were talking about this exact thing. We think in linear terms, right? We think, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to start this other business, and it's going to go from zero, and it's going to go to a couple $1,000s, and maybe I'll draw a little bit of money, and then it's going to go to this, and suddenly it's like, holy crap, right? There's opportunity coming at you from all angles, and I think you put it exactly right. How do you start to mesh these things into one sort of collective, I don't know if you call it portfolio or just kind of thing that you want to go, that you can go do, but to do it at scale. And I think that's really where the power of this model comes in. It's something that I talk to our portfolio company CEOs about this all the time. And I'm still trying to break away, right? Or still trying to break through to say, like, look, the power, go build an audience, right? Go, instead of focusing 100% of your attention on email marketing or on Peter's in this business, and demand gen and stuff, but instead of doing all of that, like do some of this, right? Do some of this audience building, because
long-term
well, and the power that it's going to have on you individually as a founder is absolutely profound, because that's what, at an early stage in a company, that's what people are investing in. They're investing in, and I don't mean necessarily VCs like me, I mean customers too, are investing in the founder.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think the audience building, I was so anti, because I wouldn't have used the word audience building 3 years ago, or even I would have used networking. Yeah. And networking was,
I hate that word.
Right. Like I sort of immediately am at like a stuffy convention center swapping business cards, knowing that I'm only doing because I want something from you or they want something from me. And what changed it for me was this idea of building a community, and then just if I would say the main hack for me, and I don't really believe in hacks, so the main tactic has been just to put as much into people as I can. And this notion that it just keeps boomeranging back. Like, I don't know when, I don't know where, it might not even be the same person. Like someone might see me really leaning into person A and just be like, wow, that was really generous. Let me lean back into you. And so I've just seen that play out over and over that, I think if you're your approach, like if you write every day and you're like really great to people and you have something useful to say, like you will have tens of thousands of people who are like willing to sign on to that, because believe it or not, it's super rare to do all three pieces, right? To breathe into them, to have something interesting to say and do it on a regular basis.
So I've got to go back for a second here to the more technical aspects. I think, I mentioned this up front, Dave is sort of my go-to management and leadership guy, right? So you built these cohorts and you and I were talking about this before, and the surprise that you had looking at the composition of the people who were coming in. Talk about that a little bit. What are the biggest challenges you see when people are coming into these cohorts? Like what are the management skills? What are the leadership skills that they seem to just be universally lacking?
Why don't you start with where you started and then where it ended up? Surprised.
Yeah. So this, I would say the surprise was when we built the first cohort, I marketed it as the new manager accelerator, thinking, a lot of times companies think of management as the destination versus an entirely new craft that your former analyst star, your former programming star now has a whole new craft to learn. So they sort of like hand them off. And then in many cases, because the manager overseeing them sort of got hazed into doing it, these guys get hazed too. So it's like, you'll figure it out. I'm smart and I figured it out. So you're smart and you'll figure it out. Right. And they're sort of forgetting the like half a decade of all the mistakes and all the the trail of bodies probably around that approach. And so my thought was, I'm going to target new managers because look, there's 5 or 6 kind of core capabilities and you can give them the basic tactics, whether that is, how do you break down work and be able to prioritize it for people? How do you set expectations so they can meet them or beat them? How do you delegate work in a way that is, gives them enough space that they feel autonomy, but not so much space you don't know what's going on? How do you go recruit people when you need to, just again, 5 or 6 different things. And I started marketing it, and so I was expecting kind of 0 to 2. That's who I was talking to. And 2/3 of the people who ended up enrolling in the course were 5 years plus in experience. And with each one, I had a conversation to say, like, I think you're misunderstanding what this is. This is for new managers. You probably don't need this. And they would say, no. I have a team of 60, but I don't know how to delegate. And I was like, wait, what? I've been losing 2 people for every one I can hire the last 2 years. Like, my team is decimated. I don't know how to recruit. And I'm like, but you've been managing for 7 years. I've even like had a conversation with someone who's like had their own company. It's huge. It's like 8-figure successful. And they're like, I've never fired anybody. And I'm like, that's like, how? Like, how are we here? And they're like, it just seems really hard. And
it sucks.
Which
it really
it is.
Sucks. Right.
Which it is, but your rest of your staff probably hates that you didn't fire the toxic person we were just talking about.
Exactly.
Instead, you just waited them out.
Incidentally, Dave, my team would pretty much say the exact same thing about me. Like, I think in 13 years, I probably fired 1 or 2 people. And I can tell you, I cried both times while I was doing it. Like, these are not things you should do. Like, and then I just made other people fire people.
My team knows.
I was constitutionally incapable of doing it.
Someone needs to go with him in there, because
that's right.
He's gonna get so emotional, he won't be able to do it.
I used to be embarrassed about this. Now I'm like proud of it. I think.
I love that Greg was like, I'm an all-star in terms of being a self-aware manager, and I'm a great delegator. That's why I haven't had to fire anybody since.
Neither.
So we learned some of it, right?
Neither of those things.
But it was funny. I was walking with a buddy today, and he's like, I've been watching your journey on Twitter, and I have 2 reactions every time. Like, wow, you have like some real insights, and why are you talking about me on Twitter? In the same sort of way. And I was like, I'm talking about me. Like 99% of those mistakes are ones that I made at some point in the last 2 decades. And so we all make them.
Relate to it. Yeah.
Well, it's, and it's funny. I literally had this conversation. I was recording a podcast with with, I know a mutual friend of ours with John Wilson today on his podcast. And we were talking about this exact thing. I mean, and all kidding aside, Dave, I mean, I literally, nobody ever taught me to manage. And I think Peter would probably be, well, you had corporate experience. So maybe you got it.
I did, but I had a mentor there and well, I won't tell, the company's name never taught me. I just like here, but right. It's funny because we were talking about this today in the office, or it was yesterday. Like being a manager is like being a parent. It's what you said, what you didn't do, what you did, what you didn't do. It's like you never feel like you're doing the right thing, and it doesn't feel like anyone really told you how to deal with this.
Well,
in any book I read about,
and in so many cases, right, especially in the startup world with founders, right, where they will come in, and very often, I mean, we've got CEOs in our portfolio like this. I mean, this is the first job they've ever had. They started, and maybe they had like a job in college as a bartender or something, and then they went out and they started a business, and that business started taking off, and they started hiring people, and and all of a sudden they're running like a real substantial organization where they're actually have to lead, and they have to actually manage to start to really build this company, but literally nobody has ever taught them anything, right? And I think, honestly, you look at that, and then I look at so many of the companies that I dealt with, as clients of mine that were huge: retail, restaurant, hospitality, airlines, things like that. That frontline manager, nobody's teaching them to lead. I mean, you and I were joking about this one day, Dave. Like the person was like making sandwiches at Subway the day before, and the manager quit, and it's like, hey, congratulations, have fun, right? You're look at this great job you've got, start managing.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's not that esoteric, there's a part of, if people left, like I know one of your goals, just give people some real tactics they can go apply. I would say like, the first thing is like, be really intentional.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting right now, a thing I'm starting to zoom in on, because I'm seeing more of, the people I'm coaching or the people in my cohorts struggle with it, is remote work.
Yeah.
And so like every bad habit you had as a manager that you could sort of get away with by like popping by the desk or running into people in the kitchen, like that's gone. So now like whatever lack of intention you have before is multiplied by 10, and so you sort of need to have a basic checklist of like, I sort of talk about it as like your primary, secondary communities, right? Your primary is going to be your boss, your peers, your customers, your direct reports. Like when was the last time you had a meaningful conversation or like a meaningful connection with them? And then the secondary is like all the people in the primary's ears, right? So, if your boss has a executive assistant, you want a good relationship with that executive assistant, right? Or if your peers have stars, your peer stars are in the ears of your stars, and so you kind of want to know them and occasionally just pop by and touch, and to do that remotely, it's like you have to be really intentional, like in a way that people will probably say like, but that's not authentic, or that's like robotic. And I'm like, no, that's just like the discipline and craft of managing.
Right.
And that's just one example.
Similar
with, yeah.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
Well, I was gonna say similar with like delegating, right? Like so many times, it was funny. My wife and I, when we were teaching the first cohort, because she's my course manager, keeping me in line. And I was walking her through the dry run of the delegation one, and she was like, "This seems like a lot. Like, don't you just tell them like, I'm delegating to you this sales job, and I want 20 sales by the end of the year. Let me know how it goes." She's like, "That's how it worked everywhere else I worked." And I was like, "But no, like you end up pay the same cost on the back end because you didn't talk about the how."
Yeah.
And she's like, "But they don't care about the how." And I'm like, "But they do."
Right.
Like, they pretend they don't care about the how, but like, I can go through a story of someone I worked with who did recruiting, and they were like, "We just want 25 great people." And he was like, "Okay," and spent $2 million, went like and recruited internationally and introduced a whole bunch of visa issues, anyways, the entire team quit because he burned them out. And guess what? Like, yeah, he got the 25 hires, but no one was pleased with the outcome. Yeah. And so investing that up front and saying, like, look, I have a picture of how this should go. What's your way that you think it should go? Maybe they're more creative than you are. Maybe they're better at it. Maybe they know new technology. So, but aligning on that up front, so now I've given you the what and the how. And And so now it's easy. Any sort of deviation from here is just us talking about the deviations, and it's like not loaded. It's not like an imagination I have in my head and a different image they have in their head and us trying to reconcile that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
again, I'm not saying anything complicated. But it's work. It takes that intention from the manager to force that conversation and take it to resolution.
How much
So
of this?
how long do I have to wait to get in the cohort?
I'll open up the next one's Monday. I'll open one more spot for you, Peter.
Holy cow.
You know, how much, so you mentioned remote work, right? And I
Yeah.
think, you know, the way that work is changing just has a profound effect on this. And you just gave some real examples of that.
Yeah.
What else should managers be thinking about? I mean, you know, we've talked a little bit about like this trying to, I mean, physically the need to still bring people together, right? Is still there, isn't it?
Our flipping of the inside, the on-sites from the off-sites.
That's right. Yep.
I think
Absolutely.
so. You know, look, I think it's a good news, bad news, right? I think the good news is we never would have gotten here without the pandemic, you know, in the sense like everyone had to turn on their Zoom boxes all at the same time.
Yeah.
And turn the video on, right? It used to be just like no one had video on. We did Zoom for years, and it was like you didn't see faces. Then all of a sudden you have a face-to-face, and they're like, I'm face-to-face with my customer every week. And so that put pressure on me to be prepared and ready.
Right.
It just was a different mentality to be face-to-face because you could see the look, and you're like, I just got the look.
We had 5 buildings, and so we were early adopters of Zoom pre-pandemic, but we'd have this terrible outcome, which was 3 people in boxes on a screen and 27 people around a conference table.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's like one of those ones where like,
you can't see anyone.
No, and those 3 people aren't in the conversation. Like, who are we kidding?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and so that idea. So the good news is we sort of all jumped into this new way of being. The bad news is it just created a whole new set of ideas we have to work through, right?
Yeah.
Like one of them, some of the people who seem to be doing better are setting like not individual boundaries, but like corporate boundaries, right? Because, you know, when my office is right next to my kitchen, there's not a lot of like separate, there's no drive home to decompress. There's no like physical barrier. So you can work
That's a big deal
all the time. And then the notifications are pinging away. And so some orgs are saying like, no, we shut off at 8. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We pick back up at 8 the next morning and like, no, like don't send. Like the leaders won't send, no one else should send, like don't do that. Greg, you were alluding to the thing we were talking about some, which is, you know, I think there's gonna be this real interesting business opportunity for people catering to what used to be corporate offsites, but now turning them into corporate onsites.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like what a game changer for businesses to say, I'm going to take all the money I was going to spend on real estate, claw that back after I get out of my leases, and then put on like these incredible experiences and events, you know, where you bring the team together. And I'm sure you would save money still doing it a week or 2 weeks, a quarter, bringing them all, you know, from around the country to like really cool places. The accelerant of like trust building and culture building in those 2 weeks when people are just like, I'm focused and I'm here and this is what it is. And it's a really unique experience.
It's the only reason I'm here. I'm not going home and doing something different. We're together.
Well, it's,
you know,
I mean, it's real quality time, right? And it's an old cliche, but you know, quality time versus the quantity of time, right? And it legitimately is versus just the grind of, you know, hey, I'm in the office and this is just where I go every day and I go eat lunch at my desk. But I mean, it becomes meaningful, and your word intentional, time spent, right? With, you know, with the team.
I think if I'm truthful to kind of what you said, you know, when I feel like weak in our team activity together as a group, it's because I'm not intentional, and I'm like, I want to lean back to the old way where like, hey, they're right here. I could just say, hey, you know, to your point, like it's absolutely true. Like that's when I'm not being intentional, and then you're like, oh, and then I'm like, oh, I have a couple, and I'm not planned ahead. So like you're behind the curve, and you know, you drop into that old
But then
way.
even we go to the on-site concept.
Right.
Yeah. Now you have to start to be intentional about the rhythm of your business, because you don't want to just bring them together and go on vacation and a boondoggle. You're like, I want to do the really critical work that has to get done and is better done in person, and marry that with a cool experience. Okay, so now how does the rhythm of your company change to get that work to show up in that intentional way? You know, what are the new cadences? And so you realize you kind of sort of like you're recasting the operating system.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. Before my last business, I I've always, my entire career, I've always pretty much always worked remotely in one form or another. And my previous company before the one I just exited, I was living in New York and the company was also based in Dallas. So I had 2 stints working in Dallas. And I was like on this 6-month or the 6-week rule, right? Where I just felt like if there was a noticeable change in me and in my relationships, more importantly, in my patience with people in the company, if I wasn't there, if I wasn't connecting with them about every 6 weeks. And I could kind of hack my way into it, but usually around, week 4, week 5, the patience, you start to think of bad intentions. You start to think, well, why is this person doing what they're doing? And that human relationship does start to fray, right? When you're really reliant on that relationship. And it was usually, for me, it was always around that 6-month or that 6-week mark. And I don't know what the magic of that was, but it just never seemed
that was you,
things
Greg.
would explode if I was past it.
Yeah.
Maybe, but
I'm
I mean,
joking.
I don't know, right? I don't know if there's some behavioral element to that or something, right? But it's just that the relationship, the foundation of the relationship would really start to fray at that point. But it was amazing. You go down there, you have a beer with somebody, and suddenly you're back to best friends again.
Well, there was a principle we had at Bridgewater, which is this idea of like, kind of like varying your distance by your confidence.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then, but there was a certain point to your, what you're calling out of like, the longer you go without those connections and kind of that human interaction. And again, I think the video helps. I can like see your face and you can see my emotion and my intent. It's very different than a call. So I think you can buy it a little longer now, but that idea of, we would talk about in moments of crisis, you wanted to like over communicate and without the communication, then people's imafill fills the spot. To your point,
right.
Greg, of like,
it's dangerous. Yeah.
Oh, he's not talking to me because, fill in whatever blank, or she's not responding because, and like, really you just had to ask why. And many times it was like, oh, my mother is sick, or like you left a letter out of my email address, or, like silly stuff.
Right.
But
and then it's the same way back the other way. And Yeah. So we're getting like a cohort right here. This is awesome.
I knew it. Dave, this was a setup all
right?
along. We couldn't do it. Was sold out. So we figured we'd have you on. We do a cohort. This is more like an intervention.
Can you come on next week too? We'll have another topic.
This is great.
No, this is amazing. This has been like killer. Like,
so one last question. Go back to the Bridgewater days, and then we're up against it. We got to definitely wrap it up. I mean, Bridgewater, that experience to me, it's one of those legendary firms, right? It's just one of those places that you just feel like, at least to me, maybe
that he's serendipity found. Like, I think he's, giving himself a little, what are the credit, but
what are the lessons that
he's humble.
What are the lessons that you really took out of there that do those management lessons that you took out of Bridgewater? I mean, Ray Dalio is a hugely popular writer now, and in his principles book, and does it translate in a way, do you think, to the early stage founder? If so, where do you see that really connecting?
It does. I would say, I don't know if the exact percentages from my, and again, put me up against Ray, you could humbly, here's my assessment. 75% of it, I think, is universally applied. I've gotten a lot of questions about the cohort, and they're like, well, does this work for my type of business? And I'm like, it really does. And I'm like shocked now seeing it, looking back at a big four firm, looking at an Ivy League institution, looking at a Fortune 500 company, and now at my own solopreneurship. And I'm like, so like things like a principle of the must-dos must be handled excellently. Yeah, I learned that again the hard way when I like let my website drive off the cliff because my must-dos weren't handled excellently. Another one is like the who is more important than the what. Like founding teams, they're make or break. Like if you pick the right partners, you have a great shot, even if you have the wrong idea. If you have the great idea and the wrong founding team, you're not going anywhere. And then the one I was thinking about one before we talked of like this, we would talk about, and Ray would write about it, as like being on the far side of fair. Like if you extend me more than like where the line is, and I extend you more than where the line is, then we're both on the far side of fair and everyone wins. And I was like, oh, like he was describing positive sum dynamics. Like, kind of starting back to the Twitter thing we were talking about. It's like, well, if I just extend everyone a lot of support and grace and push, and that ends up coming back to me in certain ways. Like everybody's going to win.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, like even seeing that, if there was parts that don't resonate for me for founders as much, it's, a lot of the principles will be around like risk.
Yeah.
And like how to, again, I think they were written from a place of, like you said, you built one of the most venerable hedge funds and largest asset managers in history. So
Right.
a lot of it is about like protection, you know what I mean? It is
Right.
like protecting you from evildoers and protecting the systems and building a mode of risk. I don't think it is there's probably aspects of startup, like you will not find the word serendipity in that book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that's the 25%, which is like,
Yeah. We're like breaking bounds, building new things, and things are going to break, and
Well,
there is going to be more risk.
It's managing risk versus all risk, right? I mean, that's
exactly.
It's the other end of the spectrum.
But again, I think you could take 70, if you read that book, and it's a long one, like anything you're reading that long, you're getting 75%. That's a pretty good hit rate.
So when does the Dave Kline book come out? Because that's coming out. I mean, I don't think it's literally coming out, but now
it's not literally coming out, but I've definitely gotten a few DMs from people saying you should write a book and you should let me publish it. And I was like, on the grand roadmap right now, I don't think I'm going to keep writing my book on Twitter, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's that's right. That's a great place to end it, Dave. This was super fun. If you want to read Dave's book on Twitter, written 280 characters at a time. And, Dave, what's the best way for people to find you? How do they connect with you? Follow you on Twitter. What's the best way to get connected?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say Twitter is probably the first and foremost where I'm most active. So, Kline II. And, you can visit, I'm also on LinkedIn as well. We're increasingly, starting to have more conversations over there. So those would be the two primary spots. And, the Management Accelerator cohort, cohort 2 is coming up on Monday. Eventually the MGMT Accelerator.com site will catch up to the courses, and you'll be able to find me there too.
It's awesome.
Cool. That's awesome.
Dave, this was so much fun having you on. I really appreciate it. I mean, just a wealth of I think knowledge for any founder that's getting started and you want to learn the principles of management and leadership at any stage of your career. I think Dave is absolutely the guy that you want to get connected with quickly. So thanks so much for sharing that with us, Dave. It's awesome to have you. See you next edition of the Founder's Journey podcast.
Thank you, guys.